On my previous video on Windows Server 2019, I showed you how you can install the Active Directory Domain Controller, also known as ADDS. But I haven't gone through like the basic setup because I basically showed you how to do it quickly on just clicking on some of the configuration that has already been done. In this demonstration, I'm going to use Windows Server 2022 Data Center Edition, and I will show you the basic configurations that any administrator or systems engineer should be doing before you start installing a domain. So the first thing you need to do is to go to the Start menu and go to the Settings, and just like any other Windows system, you need to make sure that you run all the available updates. Like for example, currently I have an update available and I should be installing this update before we join the domain and starting up your configurations. The reason for being that these updates may actually improve the performance as well as how you install your Active Directory domain controllers on your Windows Server 2022. So it is always important on a fresh install that you go through the updates, connect to the internet, and make sure that you get those updates installed. So once you have done that, I would recommend that you making sure that you have at least one of your network configuration is set to the internet, because that would allow you to download these updates. So you won't be able to download any updates if you only have one network card and it is configured to your LAN or local area network. So make sure you have at least one of the network card is connected to the internet. But at the same time, I would actually add multiple network connections, NICs or network interface cards, so that you have a way to configure internal LAN routing and other systems in your Windows Server 2022. So after you have done that, you need to go and open the Server Manager. You can open it through either the Start menu under Server Manager right here, or if this is a fresh install of Windows Server 2022, it is typically pinned on the right hand side of the Start menu. So right here, for example, Server Manager. And when you open that, it will give you the dashboard of your Server Manager. This is basically the main console which you will be using to configure and manage your Windows Server 2022. And on the left hand side, we have few options, and one of them called local server, and this is where we gonna do the basic configuration for Windows Server 2022. So click on the local server, and in here you want to change few items so that it will be configured properly to install Windows Server 2022 Active Directory Domain Controller. First thing I will always do is to check the time zone. So unless you are in the specific time zone for US Canada, which is typically the default installation, you probably have to change this option. So click on the time zone option, and under time zone, change time zone button will give you a pop-up that will allow you to change it from the default Pacific US Canada time zone to whatever the time zone you would like to change. So I'm in the Mountain time zone for the US Canada. So I'll be picking that one, and I'll click OK. But before you do that, you can also make sure that you have the automatically adjust clock for daylight saving checked off, because that will reduce your administration time when these daylight saving time changes come along, because that will automatically make sure that the server will take care of that. And as a system administrator, you do not need to enter any human input when the time zone daylight saving times changes. So I will always make sure this is checked off. Typically by default it is being checked off, and then click OK. So that will change the time. So now the time has changed to the correct time, and then you can click OK to close this window. But before we do that, I'm gonna show you a few more options in the date time that you may be interested in changing. Those include manually changing the date and time. You can click on here, and then you can change the date and time manually, which I do not recommend you doing that unless there is a need to adjust in the time, or you're in a very specialized time zone, or you're testing something in a lab environment. And if you go to the additional clocks, you can add additional clocks just like a Windows desktop environment. It just basically gives you some additional clocks up here when you click on here. So that's all it's going to do. And the next one is the internet time. What this is going to do, it's going to synchronize your clock for the Windows Server 2022 with a server, a time server that is managed by Microsoft. But if you go to the change settings, you can change this Microsoft server to something else. And then you can, also click the update now. And what that's going to do, that's going to fetch the time from that the Windows time server and making sure that it's synchronized with that internet time. I also typically keep this thing checked off and making sure it's working, because that also reduces my server administration task because they are all automated. So I will always make sure that it is checked off. And once you've done that, you can click OK. And in here you'll see that the time zone has now been changed. If you don't see the time zone has been changed, you can click this button. It's called the refresh local server. What that's going to do is it's going to update all the data in here. Like for example, this time zone information we just changed will be updated if it is not showing up here as soon as you update it. So you just have to click that button. The next thing we're going to do is to change the IP addresses in the local or LAN routing system. So we have two network cards, one called Ethernet 0, the other one is called Ethernet 1, right? But the problem with this is that now we don't know which one is what. First of all, we don't know which one is connected to the internet and which one is local, because they just say Ethernet 0 and Ethernet 1. So it's really hard for someone who is maybe new to your organization to figure out which one is what. Like, it's not hard, but it's not easy. Like, it's not just, he can just come into this local server and pick out which one is what. And the other thing is that both of them have DHCP. Maybe you want to keep it that way, but typically you have to assign static IP addresses for Windows servers to manage certain services and operations. It is not advisable to have DHCP IP addresses for your local LAN connection to your server, because that will complicate things for you, especially with RAS and other services. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to change these two names from Ethernet 0, Ethernet 1 to something meaningful. And then we're going to change the IP address configuration for one of them, because the other Ethernet card will be connected to the internet and it will be receiving a DHCP IP address from my router in this case, or your internet service provider. But it can also be configured to a static IP address as well. But for local area network card, I will be making it a static IP address, because that will make installing domain and services very, very easy. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to click on one of these items. So it doesn't matter which one you click, because it will open the same network, the options. So we're going to click on here. See, it's open the network connections options, and we see these two network cards. Now I'm going to name these network cards. So the first one, I'm going to call it the internet. The first one is going to be the LAN segment to the local area network. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to click properties. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right click and then I'm going to select the option called rename right here. And I'm going to call this one LAN segment, because it's internal LAN. You can call it internal LAN, LAN segment, whatever you like. And in here, this one is going to the internet. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to rename basically to internet. The reason why I did that is now it is easy for me to figure out which one is the internal network and which one is the one that going to the internet, which network connection is going to the internet. Now if I go back in here and if I refresh this page, these two items now going to change to those items that we have changed. See, this become LAN segment and this become to internet. And the next thing we're going to do, the one that's going to the internet, we're going to keep it in DSCP. So if I go to IPv4, it's in DSCP. But on the LAN segment, I'm going to change the IP address. So I'm going to go to properties, and in the IPv4 IP address, I'm going to assign a static IP address. So I will be using a static IP address that I decided to use, but it is arbitrary. So I'm going to use 192.168.1.3, and the subnet going to be 255.255.2550, and I'm not going to have a default gateway because this is going to be its own default gateway. And for the DNS server, I'm going to use the Google DNS server, which is going to be 8.8.8 for now, which we will change later. And then we're going to say OK. Another thing I'm going to do in this LAN segment is that I will never going to be using IPv6. So I'm going to simply disable the IPv6 because there's no need for me to use it, and then I'm going to close it. You may also disable the IPv6 for the network card that is connected to the internet if you are not using it. It is recommended that you shut down any services, including IPv6 services, when you are not using it for any of your services or any of your configurations on your Windows servers. This will reduce the overhead, and it will also reduce for a threat actor to gain access to your network by utilizing a channel that is basically not in use at the first place. So I usually turn off IPv6 configurations on all of my servers because I never use IPv6 for my lab environment. But if you are using IPv6, you can turn it on. But for now, I have turned it off. So now we have a LAN segment or internal network card that has a static IP address, and we have an external network card that is currently on DSCP. So if I close this and refresh this server manager local server page, you will see now it says this one LAN segment, we have 192.168.1.3, which is the internal routing IP address, and then we have a internet IP address that is DSCP, which also can be static if you have a static IP address, if you decided to do so. If you want to do that, it's the same process. You click on it, you want to click on properties, right click properties, and you go in here and you can change this configuration to your static IP address for your ISP, but I keep it as DSCP. So those are the basic things that you need to do on the network side. The next thing you need to do before you install the Active Directory domain controller on this Windows Server 2022 is to change the computer name. The computer name on any Windows device is the name that can be discovered on the local area network. So this server, so any device that is on the network that trying to look for this server will see this weird name. So this is basically a randomly assigned name assigned by the Microsoft when you install the Windows Server 2022. But this is not good because you would like to have a easy name to associate this server, so that in the local area network, when a device try to connect to this server, it is easily can be reached using that server name. Obviously, yes, you can reach this server by easily using the local area IP address, but the server name is also important in some other configurations as well. So we're going to click on this server name, and under the computer name in the system properties pop-up that you get, we're going to click on change. So right here to rename this computer or change this domain or work group, click change. So we're going to click change. And I'm going to change this computer name to SS Serve 2022. The reason I do that because it's easy for me to remember. It's arbitrary. I just renaming this computer server name so that it's easy for me to remember when I try to find this server on the domain, right? So we are not going to change anything else like the member of the domain or work group because those will be changed as we install Active Directory. We just simply change the server name and click OK. And when you change the server name, you need to reboot your computer in order for this server name to change in effect, because otherwise it will not, it will be finalized until you reboot that server. So because of that, you will get a pop-up like this. It will say you must restart your computer to apply these settings. You're going to say okay, and when you try to close it, it'll tell you, hey, you must restart your computer, apply these settings, otherwise it will not take into effect. So you can choose the option for restart later if you want to change something, or you can simply restart at this point. Once you have rebooted the server, you will see that the computer name has now changed, and now you can go ahead and start installing all your other services and features, including Active Directory Domain Controller. Again, I have already covered the Active Directory Domain Controller installation in a video on December 2021. You can go ahead and check that on my YouTube channel. This is just a basic overview of the fundamental things that you should look for before you start installing items on Windows Server 2022, so that you have a basic idea about what to do as a system administrator. So that's everything for today. Until next time, good luck with your exams and